one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please call the roll.
Councilmember Francisco? Hotchkiss? Here. House? Murillo?
Here.
Rouse? White? Mayor Schneider?
Here. Any public comment items not on the agenda?
No, we don't.
They're all agenda items. Okay. So moving on to the, I guess we're doing community development first. So, Mr. Casey.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and council members. I'll introduce Sue Gray, Community Development Budget Manager, to make the presentation. And Sue, of course, does all the heavy lifting for the department in putting our budget together. So we thank her for all of her good work, and positive comments go to her, and negative comments go to her as well. And we've got our division managers and many of our supervisors here, so if you have any questions, we're ready to answer them. But I'll turn it over to Ms. Gray for our presentation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members. Today we're presenting the Community Development Department's fiscal year 14 and 15 budgets. My presentation focuses primarily on fiscal year 14. Fiscal year 15 for us is basically status quo from 14. The only changes are in the citywide adjustments for salaries and benefits and appropriated or allocated expenses. So I'm going to start with the department overview and then move on to the general fund. And then I'll break if you'd like to ask questions on the general fund at that point, and then go into the Redevelopment Agency Retirement Obligation Fund, the Affordable Housing Fund, and then Home and Community Development Block Grant Funds. This chart just shows our entire department, the organizational chart: planning, admin, housing and human services, and building and safety. And then we have our arts off there to the side. We have 12 programs and 6 funds. This shows a summary of the total budget by fund. So this includes all of the funds. General fund is the largest at 48%. And then we have our CDBG fund, CDBG program income, home funds. Those are all small percentages. The Affordable Housing Fund. The Redevelopment Agency Retirement Obligation Fund looks large, but really that is, the vast majority of that is to pay off the bonds. In prior years, that number was like 20,000 and above. So pretty much all but almost 300,000 is bond repayments. This chart shows the positions from fiscal year 2009 to 2014. And we just wanted to show that since we had budget reductions starting in 2009, we are down 21 full-time equivalents, which is a 24% reduction. That's a combination. It's not all general fund budget issues. That's a combination of the general fund budget and the dissolution of the redevelopment agency. Okay, now we'll go to the general fund. This is the same chart, but just showing the general fund programs. There are 10 programs and 61 full-time equivalents. So of the 66 full-time equivalents, department-wide, 61 of those are general fund employees. Okay, that's also showing just in the general fund that we've lost 10.5 positions since 2009. The total general fund, wrong slide. The total general fund budget that we have is $9.78 million. The majority of that is planning, 47%, followed by building and safety, 33%, admin, housing and human services at 16%, and arts at 4%.
Just a quick question. How many of the positions that were lost because of the dissolution of the RDA?
There were, of the, I have that. Of the 21.25 positions that were lost, 10.75 were other funds. The majority of that RDA. I don't have the specific number, but I would say the vast majority. And 10.5 were general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, of the $9.78 million in our general fund budget, the Community Development Department expects to generate a total of $4.67 million in revenues next year. This means that we recover approximately 48% of our costs, which leaves 52% funded from the general fund. The largest revenue source for community development are the fees and charges related to planning and building activity, which I've depicted on this slide. We're projecting a slight increase in these fees and charges for fiscal year 14. However, revenues are soft and they continue to be hard to project. The next few slides, we'll talk about the proposed changes that are included in our fiscal year 14 budget. Although not a budgetary change, we wanted to let you know that for the past year and a half, we've kept a senior plans examiner position open in building and safety, primarily as a budget savings measure. However, due to the increasing workload, we've recently filled this position. So it's not a new budget item. It was in our budget as a vacant position, and we filled it. The rental housing mediation program has been absorbed into the general fund.
Go ahead, Mr. White has a question.
Thank you. Was that filled within the department at this point?
The new employee?
Yes, the new
No, it was an open recruitment, and it was someone from outside
Great,
the
thank you.
organization. Okay, and the rental mediation program has been absorbed into the general fund with the council's allocation last year. Due to budget reductions over the years, the Community Development Department has been reduced in size. Some of our services have been impacted as a result. One of the largest impacts has been in zoning enforcement. So we found for fiscal year 14, we were able to find $30,000. We absorbed it in our status quo budget to hire some hourly help to help with the enforcement in zoning. So that's a change. And then we've also included a total of $30,000 in our fiscal year 14 and 15 budgets. It's spread over the 2 years, $20,000 in fiscal year 14 and $10,000 in 15. And this is to develop the Historic Preservation Work Program. The majority of that funding will go for a web-based software application so that we can have information available on the website. And then there's some staffing costs in there to help develop historic districts. And we've also included a zoning ordinance update. It's funded through the capital program. It consists of $597,000 spread over 3 years. You can see the chart there for fiscal year 14 and 15. We plan on having a consultant help us out with that. We plan on hiring a full-time project planner for 2.5 years, so that position wouldn't start until January of 2014. And then we put in a little money for city attorney support for the work that they'd be doing on the new ordinances.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
Hi, Ms. Gray. Will we hear more about that in subsequent talk? Or are you going to talk more about it now, the zoning changes?
I myself, I'm not going to talk about it, but Betty Weiss is here, and she can
Is
talk.
it appropriate to do it now, or should we wait to another time until
We
then?
can do it now.
Okay, so at some point, let's do that if we could.
Good afternoon, Mayor Schneider and Council. The slide above shows a summary of some of our objectives that we hope to achieve with a major update of the zoning ordinance. First off is to improve clarity and consistency. The city's zoning ordinance is really still based on a original ordinance dating back to 1957 as part of the municipal code. Of course, there have been amendments to various sections and special programs over the years, such as, for example, just a few months ago, the council updated the development plan and growth management ordinance, which is a whole chapter within the code. But what we're talking about here for clarity and consistency is really the overall foundation of the zoning ordinance, which zone districts we have, what are they titled, what are the uses allowed, what are the basic development standards and definitions. So what we're looking to do is to align the municipal code zoning ordinance with today's policy environment. We've updated many general plan and policy documents since this ordinance was really drafted, and there are things that are a little bit out of sequence and out of step. We also want to simplify its application. I believe Councilmember White has made a comment at a meeting or two about needing to find just the right people to help you decode our zoning code. And we work really hard to ensure that all the planners in the planning division, are able to do that, but it is a challenge at times. So we want to modernize the structure, as I mentioned, zone district definitions, parking and setback. We also have administrative tools that we would like to explore. Just a few weeks ago, when the council had a joint meeting with the Planning Commission, and Ms. Renee Brooke presented a proposal to update our hedge ordinance, again, which is a small section of the code that we'd like to get working on right now. She shared with you the idea that we could have some guidelines for some variation with structures such as posts or trellis entry and things like that. And so we would really need to update our code to allow for administrative procedures such as that. And then the last bullet on the overhead is just to acknowledge that really for the planning division, this code, it is like our structural infrastructure. It's what we work with day in, day out, and it really has an effect on the economic development for our whole community, be it from a small change of use, retail change of use, to major development. And we think that we hear this time and time again from people we work with in all walks of life, that having clarity in what is expected really helps make projects happen, as well as happen the way the community would like to see them. So we were thankful for this opportunity that presented itself as part of your overall budget to consider a capital project for the zoning ordinance.
And in regards to zoning reports, there have been, or at least requests by some, I don't know how many, that they become optional. Is the city considering that, and therefore would that reduce our expenses?
In terms of zoning information reports, city staff, myself, Paul Casey, and Steve Wiley, as well as some time with Mr. Armstrong, we have worked very closely with a group of realtors from the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors, and we have been exploring a possibility of a code amendment. And that could be something that would happen independent of this overall update or folded in. At this time, the last we heard from the association was they were holding off. They didn't want us to proceed with an amendment. Staff was recommending that the city continue to provide the zoning information report as a requirement. I think you all recall a couple of years ago we made, through an action of the council amending the code, ZIRs optional for condominiums. What we've been talking with the association about is things like the modernizing, the definitions, the setbacks, and administrative changes. So really, that work could very well fold in and be part of this project.
Just practically speaking, I think that, and maybe this has already been stated to you, but most realtors would recommend to their buyers, just for their own protection, that they get a zoning report, even if it was made optional. So it's one of those things that, yeah, you can not do it and not pay for it, but we really strongly recommend that you do. So that would be a way to go. But I'm sure you've heard that argument before.
And I just also wanted to just kind of reiterate that the way we're viewing this, it's a little unusual. It's like a capital project, similar to what we do with like software updates, because we view this as one time only. And although the department contemplates bringing a position on to manage this, they also recognize that after the 2.5 years is up, that position we will reduce a position and go back down. So the goal is definitely to not, make a permanent addition to the department budget, but we felt that it was best to have a city employee lead this effort. But the department fully recognizes that after the 3-year period, we will reduce that position back down.
Okay, now on to fees. The Community Development Department fee schedule includes a 3% increase across the board for most line items except for zoning information reports and modifications. The zoning information reports are at full cost recovery, so we didn't increase those. And the modifications, the amounts have been adjusted for different variations of types of modification, but they did not go up 3%. We have submitted a list of additional requests to the city administrator, and they're on this slide to show you. They're in priority order, although our prioritization is not real strong between the three. The first one, zoning enforcement hourly help, as I mentioned on a previous slide, we found $30,000 to help out with that in our budget, but we are requesting an additional $30,000 for more hourly help to assist further in enforcement, plan check, ZIR timeliness, and the front counter. We're requesting $37,750 to reinstate the design review board and commission stipends. Those were taken out of the budget, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. We've discussed this at the Planning Commission, Historic Landmarks Commission, Architectural Board of Review, and the Single Family Design Board, and the majority of them are in favor of reinstating them. Oh, I'm sorry, Planning Commission, we discussed it there. They already have it, but they expressed support of having the other committees receive it again, be reinstated.
And just to be clear, the stipend is how much per what?
It's $25 per consent meeting and $50 for regular meetings.
If I may, Madam Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr.
Is the
Hotchkiss.
intent of this to facilitate and speed action on all applications, et cetera? You mentioned over-the-counter stuff. I mean, I'm hoping that that's the case.
The first one, you mean? The zoning?
The zoning?
The stipend, not the stipend.
Enforcement, hourly help?
Right.
Of the three things listed above, I think in terms of speeding in the process, the building inspector as well as zoning staff, I think the more staff that we have, engaged in, be it an enforcement process, a permitting, or an inspection, that could be seen as something of an increase in service and therefore speeding up the work that we do. For us, adding additional zoning hourly staff is really our ability to get to and investigate complaints from the community about possible violations. And then the stipends, what we've heard from board and commissioners, and I think you have a few in the audience who would like to address the council on this item, that really could be seen as important in terms of helping recruit for the positions. It could, but more importantly, it's a gesture of appreciation for the time and effort that these volunteers put in the review process.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, to that end, having been a parking committee member when we had stipends too, I think it was $10 a year back then. But, and as much as we do appreciate the effort, and I know especially in some of these boards and commissions, it's a tremendous amount of time. And in terms of the scope of the budget, it's a pretty small amount of money. But it is also the reason why those were peeled back at that time was appearances, feelings, and the way things were going with the budget. I really, having just been to that really cheery presentation this morning at the economic forecast, I don't think we're out of that particular moment yet. And I just kind of wondered about the wisdom of going back to it at this time. And once again, it's going to be symbolic either way. I don't know how much this would help in the recruiting and retention effort because it is such a small amount of money. But and I'll be curious to hear from the members of the public, that the commissioners that are here.
And just from a process standpoint, I've asked all of the operational departments in the general fund, so not the admin departments, but you'll see the same thing from library, from police and fire, that if the council at the end of the budget process wants to consider supplementing funding or enhancing services, to give you what their priorities would be. So what you have here is not something that's in the proposed budget, but is what if the council wants to do it, and kind of in June when we're balancing, doing the final balancing, for you to consider. So you'll see this from community development, you'll see it also from library, and then from police and fire, and let's see, in Parks and Rec. You'll see slides like this that basically summarize it, and then we'll give you a list of all of these at the end of the process, and then if council wants to do that, out of that small surplus that we have, you can do it, or you can leave that surplus there.
And thank you for that clarification. That makes a difference. Thank you.
Mr. House?
Actually, what you just said helps me a lot because, I mean, as somebody who was on the Planning Commission for 8 years and Mr. White as well, I can just speak for myself. That's, the Planning Commission does already get theirs, right? But for the ABR and HLC and Single Family Design Review Board, I mean, at those levels, those people are investing just unbelievable amounts of time preparation and doing the work, and there's no way to compensate them for that. But there is something to be said for that nod of appreciation, and it's something that, of course, I don't know. I guess you're saying that we will look at this along with other possibilities at the very end and look what available funds there might be. Okay, thank you. I will argue for at some point that we, as soon as we can at least, reinstate that as a real nod of respect and appreciation to them.
Okay. Our third request is $50,000 to bring our building inspector back to full-time in community development. For the last several years, we have shared him 50% with water resources and public works. That was a budget savings measure a few years ago, actually 3 or 4, I think. We'd like him back to work on neighborhood improvement task force issues, and we've talked about putting him back in our budgets over the last couple of years, and if not approved as an additional request, we'll probably bring it back in fiscal year 15 when that budget is looked at, the amended budget. And the Arts Commission, although not really a departmental issue, as far as our department budget, we've received a request from the Arts Commission for an increase of $16,500, and I have a little more detail on that on my next slides. This chart shows the art advisory funding history from 2009 to the proposed 2014. They had a 20% reduction with all the budget impacts. They've been the same for 3 years, and we are proposing in the proposed budget before you, they are in there at level funding. They've submitted a request of $16,500. They're finding it hard to continue with certain items that they've always carried out in the past. The City Poet Laureate Honorarium of $1,000, City Hall Art Gallery Exhibition, $1,500, Annual Arts Symposium, $3,500, and Jardín de las Granadas for $2,500. The last two, the Annual Arts Symposium and Jardín de las Granadas, those were both funded with RDA funds. The increased salary and benefits cost, the city provides funding. We cover a percentage of the executive director, the visual arts coordinator, and the business specialists. They're finding that now combined funding from the county, the city, and the California Arts Council is no longer sufficient to cover all of their salary and benefit costs, so they're asking for a small increase. And then we've included a small amount for the conservation and or possible modification to the crossing art piece on Lower State Street in order to help alleviate problems that we've had involving aggressive panhandling and loitering. These are our key P3s for planning. Strive to maintain levels of service for enforcement, counter, plan check, and zoning information reports. Continue the implementation of the general plan. Work on SB 375, Sustainable Community Strategy. Do the Historic Preservation Work Program. And then make improvements to the land development team process and environmental review procedures. And these are some other key P3s for our department. Building and safety is going to continue outreach to local architects and contractors to foster a more professional working relationship and discuss potential changes to the land development team process to accelerate project review timeframes, increase review consistency, and provide building code training opportunities. Administration and community development is going to continue to work with the Central Coast Collaborative on Homelessness and the Milpas Action Task Force in order to coordinate city's response to homeless issues. And the rental housing mediation program will provide services to 1,400 residents, providing them with information, consultation, and mediation services.
Mr. Francisco has a question.
Thank you. Zoning information reports, who does those?
The staff in the planning division has the responsibility for preparing the reports. We have one full-time assigned planning technician who's our primary person. We also have regularly been pulling in up to 2 or 3 other people, including the zoning information supervisor. Their time on zoning information reports is fairly substantial these days. So At present, I would say we're approaching about 1.5 FTE towards that effort if you include all the people who participate.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Why don't we have two speakers who want to speak to the stipend issue. Why don't we do that now before we get to, you don't have to sit through the rest, you're welcome to sit through the rest of the community development budget hearing, but since it seems like a good spot, so I'll start with Brian Miller and then Paul Zink. Good afternoon.
Hi. Hi, City Council members. I got this little prepared thing here for you. My name is Brian Miller, and I currently sit on the Single Family Design Board. I've been on the board, I think, for over 2 years now. I truly enjoy it, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to be part of the board that plays a crucial role in the development and management of our architectural heritage we call Santa Barbara. If there's one thing I've learned being on the board is that our community takes its architecture very seriously. It's what makes our town unique and very special, which many would argue as to whether that's a good or bad thing. Personally, I think it's all, after all is said and done, the aesthetic experience of our town is a very positive one. However, there's one aspect I find very odd, if not somewhat troubling, is how the City Council assumes and it seems it takes for granted on the volunteer duties of what we are expected to do. As soon as I joined the board, I started receiving emails as to what sites I was recommended to visit on my own time, using my own car, using my own gas. Sometimes the city provided bus caravans, but only for the big controversial projects. I was told at one point the board received a small stipend to cover such incidentals, but is now no longer available. Then came all the news and hoopla over a board member using their influence to promote their projects and getting a hefty fine for conflict of interest charges, and then later another board member expressing his political social beliefs for abstaining his vote, which turned into more controversy. This resulted in the city attorney stepping in, politicians stating their support or disgust for what had transpired. And I'm scratching my head, I volunteered for this? We also get many projects where the applicants bring their attorney to either support or try to deny a project. We on the board then become a de facto judge and jury to hear their case and to make a judgment as to what they are to do. So I guess my point being, I love being on the board. I think it's very important we have the boards of architectural review. It creates community participation and involvement in how our city develops and manages its architectural character. With that said, restoring the stipend to the architectural review boards is a good and prudent thing to do and a great bargain considering all the things that is expected of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Zink? And thank you for your service, of course, on the board.
Council members, Paul Zink. I just want to thank you for all the work that you do, and you all know that the hours we do put in. I've been on the ABR for 7 years, and I've been on the Single Family Design Board for 4 years, and I like it as well, and I've learned a lot, and I think the community really, really does appreciate it. So I would like you to encourage you to return the stipends to the board. More important to that is if there's a list of priorities, the enforcement, extra zoning enforcement is actually more important than the stipend. Even though it's coming from me because I would love to spend the money that you give to me, but really, why do we do what we do if it's not being regulated out there in the public? And perhaps you need to ask the city staff to give you a list of the outstanding zoning enforcement cases that are out there and take a look at the history. I was on the sign committee and I was shocked about how many open enforcement cases there are. It's just endless and just goes on and on. It's like, why are we here telling this person how to design their sign when this person over here is truly in violation of that sign? So there's a disconnect there, and that is actually more important than the stipend, because what makes our town beautiful is that we do have design review, and we have lots of architects and designers that care about the city and volunteer their time. One other thing I want to talk about is under administrative tools, the board is putting together, or the staff is going to be doing their update to the code. They're spending $600,000 in doing this. It would be good if we had a conversation about the appeal process. Maybe once every 10 years we have this conversation. We realize the appeal process is fine just the way it is. But you know what? We still need to have that conversation every once in a while to verify that it's happening. Because you need to look at the past appeals, how many were a board that was divided, how many was a board that was a supermajority, and then what was the outcome of the process. You at the City Council have spent 3 hours reviewing something, and then all of a sudden you didn't change the direction that the ABR had taken. I have stood in front of you both in support of an appeal and not in support of appeal. So there's a lot of mixed results, but the fact is, if there's a way that we can evaluate an appeal to see if it has significant merit, every appeal, everybody's opinion has merit. It's just whether or not it rises to the level of being brought to your attention. And the amount of time that you spend is tripled by the amount of time that staff spends bringing it to you. The suggestion that I would recommend is that Paul Casey, or the director of the Community Development Department, if he sees an appeal and sees that it has merit, it comes directly to you. Or if there are 2 members of the City Council who believe the appeal has merit, it comes up. But you know what? Not every appeal has merit. So then it goes back to what the Design Review Board does and how we approach a project. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your service as well. Okay, any other questions on this part of the presentation? Okay, why don't you continue? Thank you.
Okay, now we will go into the Redevelopment Agency Retirement Obligation Fund. This slide shows the revenues from fiscal year 2012 actual to recommended 2014. The majority, as I said earlier, are for repayment of the bonds, both the Redevelopment Agency and the RDA housing bonds. We have $250,000 budgeted for the administration of the successor agency and $60,000 for the Paseo Nuevo property management ongoing costs. Budget amounts for any projects that have been approved on a recognized obligation payment schedule, or what we call a ROPS, will be carried over from fiscal year 13, or if they're new projects, they will come to the successor board for approval. The key P3s for the RDA Retirement Obligation Fund are to prepare the 2 recognized obligation payment schedules that are due for that fiscal year, make the bond repayments, develop and carry out the long-range property management plan, and complete any of the projects that are approved on the ROPS, including Bath Street Pocket Park, Victoria Theater, Library Plaza design, and Lower State Street sidewalks. Those projects have all been approved on ROPS. Next, we'll move on to the Affordable Housing Fund. Since the dissolution of the Redevelopment Agency, we now have our Affordable Housing Fund consists of interest generated from the former Redevelopment Agency housing loans. We're estimating $502,000 for fiscal year 14. The majority of these funds are budgeted to cover costs of administration of the Affordable Housing Program. This shows the expenditures for fiscal year 12 through 14. You can see that most of it is for administration. If you look at the line called appropriated reserve, those are the funds that we'll have left over because we didn't need the whole amount of $502,000 for fiscal year 14. Or if you look at fiscal year 12, those are actuals. At the end of the year, we actually had $68,859 left over. So those monies are put into a reserve account, and they can help to cover administrative costs in future years if our revenues decrease, and or they can be used for new affordable housing projects.
Can you go back for, what was the 2013 amended and projected for appropriated reserve was quite big. What happened for that kind of savings to occur? Was there a salary saving between the 14,005 and the 111,000?
That is primarily because we budgeted, I believe, 400,000. The amended was 415,000 in interest income, and we're projecting to get 502,000. So we're expecting to get more than we budgeted.
Got it. Thank you.
EP3s for the Affordable Housing Fund. The goal of that program is a preservation of our affordable housing stock. Staff monitors and enforces violations on 1,220 rental units and 485 owner-occupied units. They also assure compliance with affordable housing restrictions. They do that during initial sales or resales, refinances, modifications, or subordinations. Now we come to home and CDBG funds, and I just wanted to say up front that we still have not heard what our actual allocations for home and CDBG will be. It's extremely late in the year to be finding out. Our action plan is due on May 16th, and I'm not sure how we submit it when we don't know what our allocation is. We are projecting a 16% reduction for both of these grants for fiscal year 14. This chart shows our home funding, how it has gone down 60% since 2011, which is drastic for our history that we've had with home funding. In 2011, we had almost 865,000, and we are estimating for 14 to have 353,000. We're allowed to use 10% of our home grant for administrative expenses. For fiscal year 14, we're projecting that to be around 35,000. Just as a comparison, back in 2011, we had 86,000 for administration of the program. So that is a loss of $51,000. 90% of home funds need to be used for loans or grants to affordable housing projects that target very low and low income households. The same with CDBG. You can see from fiscal year 2011 to estimated 2014, there's a 44% reduction. We've gone from 1.1 million down to 656 projected. I'm still hoping that on both of these that it will not be a 16% reduction. It'll be less than that, but we just have no idea. We talked to our HUD representative yesterday, and she just said, I can't tell you, nobody knows. So that's the information that we have. Up to 20% of our CDBG grant can be used for administrative expenses. We're projecting that at $131,000 this year, and just as a comparison, in fiscal year 2011, that was $233,000. So we have $102,000 less to cover the administration of that program. Unfortunately, there's no decrease in the regulations. When your funding goes down, you have to do all the same work you do for $1 million that you do for $500,000. So it's becoming harder and harder to administer these two programs, CDBG and home, and meet the federal regulations. Up to 15% can be used for public services, and at least 65% needs to be used for capital improvement projects. The 15% CDBG public services funding is combined with city human service funds that is allocated by council, and we allocate those through a combined application process. In order to meet the HUD deadlines for the Community Development Block Grant Program, the funding allocation process is started in November. As a result, Council makes a Human Services funding commitment in October so that the Community Development Human Services Committee and the public know about how much money is going to be available. There's been some discussion at Council regarding the timing of Human Services funding approval, and the Finance Committee is going to be discussing this at their meeting on May 14th. For this year, on March 26th, Council approved the grants for fiscal year 14. They consisted of 10 CDBG capital grants and 47 CDBG public service and human services grants. We are setting aside $75,000 in human services funding, once again for the Central Coast Collaborative on Homelessness. And with that, we will take questions.
Any other questions? I have a question for Ginny Brush, if you want to come on up. And you probably don't have the answer to this right away, but in light of your commission's request for additional funding, most of the money the city gives as part of the contract goes for other grants, as part of the events and festivals and the organizational development grants and those kind of things. And I'm curious if you have a sense of the trend of receiving more money, whereas our funding level's been level. How much more in grant requests are you receiving? Has there been an increase in requests, and do you know by how much? Meaning, is there a larger and larger gap each year with the amount of funding being requested by the community versus what you have available to give, similar to what we hear from the Human Services component each year. I know that that definitely happens. Just curious what your sense is over the last maybe 3-4 years in the arts funding categories.
Mayor Schneider, members of council. I can talk in general terms. I don't have exact specifics, but I can tell you we've been down at 20% from where we were, and that we continue to get more requests for grants in each category. Typically, we get numbers in the neighborhood of 70 to 75 grants each year for the funding. We have, I'll give you an example, we have like less than $50,000 for community arts grant funding. We have in the neighborhood of $100,000 for events and festivals, and we have, I believe, in the neighborhood, I can't remember if it's 140 or so thousand in the area of organizational development. These funds have been so significant because these agencies need the money so desperately because they've lost, especially organizational development. These are our nonprofits that are so vital to the community, and they've been hit by the economy, by the foundation support has also been reduced, as well as private donations to them. So this money's been essential, and that certainly could improve. They continue to use that money, and the grant process continues to be more and more competitive as more and more people are making very strong cases for the funding that they're requesting. They desperately need it, as they suffer a lot of what you've heard here today: downsized staffing, increased overhead, increased costs of running their organizations.
So perhaps as we move forward in the budget process, as Mr. Armstrong says, we're going to get a menu of different items perhaps to consider. If by that time we could get from you or from staff, probably from your office, since you get the grant request, maybe from fiscal year 2009 to the present, how much money did you have available for each of the categories, and how much grant request was there? So we could see that information. That would be helpful.
We can definitely get that. Each year when we provide our report to you, we talk about the amount of money that was requested and what we were able to give with the funds we have available.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you. And Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question for Ms. Gray. When we moved to put the rental housing mediation task force into the general fund, one of the discussions we were having with the group at the time was other sources of revenue raising vis-a-vis either a sliding fee scale, other types of fundraising. Have any discussions gone forward with any of that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, we have looked at different options in the past. We looked at doing a fee on the business license. That would have to go to a vote of the people. So at this point, we've pretty much exhausted all of our research options for raising money for that program.
Because in my personal discussions with some of the members of the task force, we talk, I mean, if you want to do 1,400 cases, as it says here in the report, it's less than $100 a case to raise the amount of money that would supplant the general fund money. Now, I know that not everybody's going to be able to pay, but certainly $75 or $78.97 doesn't go very far in a lawyer's office. So I would think that this service is valuable enough, and the reason why we went this direction, because everybody recognizes it's such a valuable service. So I would hate to just kind of give up on that and say there's no, not a business license thing, but a user fee certainly of some type. But I don't know if it can be stipulated or recommended.
We looked at doing kind of a user fee for all the people who own rental units in the city, but that also would have to go, it would be a vote of the people. That's something that we can't do. We decided not to pursue just charging landlords. Most of our clients couldn't afford even the $78 towards the mediation or the information. And to charge just the landlords would give the impression in the community of being pro-landlord.
Well, that's why I mentioned sliding fee scale, because I realize a lot of your clients could not do that, but maybe some clients could do 20, some clients could do 50 or 100, or maybe a landlord would split. I didn't know, but if that had not doing a mandated flat fee per se, which would require, of course, as you say, a vote of the people. But I didn't know if that discussion just got swept off the table and said, we're fine, we're in the general fund now, don't worry about it, or that's...
The task force has looked at that, and they have decided that they do not want to pursue it, but we can have them look at it again, sitting in council.
Madam Mayor, council members, the task force took a year really looking at a whole bunch of different funding options when they were running the risk of being eliminated or losing the general fund support and such. And council came up with the decision to move forward with the general fund support. And I'll be honest, we've essentially told the task force to go back and do their job, to move on, to move forward. If a majority of council would like to charge us with kind of reopening that examination again, we can do so. But I think Ms. Gray's right. They spent a good year on it. There's pros and cons. There's no easy answer there. If there's a desire from council to give us direction to go back and reopen that, we will. But at this point, we've kind of told the task force to go back to doing the work.
They received a grant, I know, from some foundations, like the Fund for Santa Barbara was one. Are they pursuing that again, or was that a one-time?
Madam Mayor, my understanding is that was a one-time.
Okay.
The only ongoing grant they receive is the City Human Services
Okay,
grant.
so they still apply for that and receive funding
Yes,
through
they
us,
do.
but through that process.
And they actually received a $1,000 increase
Right.
for this next year, which
Right.
is great.
Right, okay, thank you. Any other, Mr. House?
Just to that point, as I understand it, in the city of Santa Barbara, we do when there's transfer of ownership, when there's development plans being proposed by owners of properties, homes, as well as commercial. But for in the realm of ownership of property, the city has large processes that assist with development plan approval and with all sorts of different things. I mean, we have lots of services for owners. We're a majority renter city, and one of the very few direct services that are available when there is the possibility of a dispute between a landlord and a tenant is this. I would just remind the rest of the council, I mean, what we offer to renters is really very, very little in services that would benefit them. This is one that has a relatively small cost and is is available to not just the one side of the equation, to both. And so I really am hopeful that we continue to keep this in a safe zone. And not go back through that wrangle again. That really did harm the program for the time that they were struggling. Of course, the economy was terrible, but we're on the other side of that piece of it right now. I'm hopeful that we keep this steady.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Move on to the library.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I'm Irene Macias, Library Director for the Santa Barbara Public Library System. And I'm here today to present the department's budgets for fiscal years 2014 and 2015. With me to present the budget this afternoon are Scott Love, Library Services Manager, and Margaret Esther, Library Services Manager. Margaret is a new manager since our last year's presentation, so this is her first time doing this. And just to mention, both of them come from the San Diego area, so they knew each other in those previous lives. So the budgets we prepared for you today are basically status quo budgets and include some internal reorganization that will allow us to align our current positions in a more strategic manner after the staffing reductions that were made during the recession, and to position the library to incorporate changes in technology and to continue finding ways to streamline the operation. Our presentation today will include a department overview. We do have some statistics and benchmarks that show how we stack up against other libraries. And then Scott Love will present the general fund budget with P3 highlights. Margaret Esther will present the county library fund, and then we also have a wish list of unfunded service enhancements. Quick look at our organization chart. The library currently has 36 authorized positions, and we plan to use 48,000 hours of hourly hours next fiscal year. In 2015, that number does drop because we have been successful in getting grant funding for programs that allow us to hire staff temporarily. So if in 15, if we don't get continued grants, then that would drop. So I oversee the administration office and our fledgling development department, which you will hear about our successes a little later. Scott Love oversees the central library and also some system-wide responsibilities relating to our technical and digital services. Margaret oversees all the branches, and that includes the county-owned libraries and the Goleta Library, owned by the city of Goleta, and actually shared responsibility with the county. Her system-wide responsibilities include collection development and automation. The library has two funds, the general fund, which supports the Central and East Side Library. It also includes the staffing for the back of house operations and the administration office. County Library Fund, again, is all the other branches, including Los Olivos and San Ynez, which are two very small stations that are only open 3 hours a week each. We are also a member of the Black Gold Cooperative Library System. This is a group of 6 jurisdictions in SLO County and Santa Barbara County that cooperate. We share catalog. We share our items so our users can get materials anywhere from, and also includes Santa Paula Library, so they can get books from Santa Paula all the way up to Paso Robles. So thanks to the council, we are open again on Mondays, and I wanted to share the successful statistics. Mondays are very popular, and since January, Monday has had the most visits of any day of the week. So thank you again. So the story here is it shows some comparison data, and I did include only the city libraries because when we use the county library data, their funding is so much lower that it kind of drags down our city libraries' performance. So I pulled out the city libraries. I have data from fiscal year 10 because that is the most recent information available from the state and national numbers. But I also included fiscal year 14 because I want to show the improvement since those dark days of the recession, and it's something that we're proud of. So the story is the three rows that are highlighted in green are our usage data, and you can see that we are higher than the California mean, but not perform less than the national data. But if you look at our the resources available to us, the two lighter yellow, looks yellow, the total materials per capita and paid FTEs, we're substantially below both, we're at the same as the state, but below the national mean. So the story is that we very effectively use the limited resources that we have to provide a high level of service to our library users.
Madam Mayor, if I could you go back to that last slide, Mrs. Macias? Circulation per capita, what does that mean? Is that the books that they've taken out?
That means the number of items checked out per resident. So we have 86,000 residents, so that would mean that if each and every resident used the library, they would have each checked out 7 books
Right, I
in a
understand.
year.
Has the new automated system increased our usage or just sped up the usage that's there?
You mean the self-check
Yes.
kiosks? They have allowed us to be open the number of hours that we're open because you see there isn't a staff person there assisting you. So we used to have 2 people at that desk. Now there's one behind that basically is doing library cards or dealing with account problems. But for the most part, I believe we have, is it close to 90%? 80, close to 80% of the items checked out are through those kiosks.
And the I don't know what the things you call at the exit, those light up, am I correct? If somebody doesn't properly check out a book?
Yes, those are security
It really
gates.
looks like Disneyland in there sometimes. So, and then the people just stop and come back. Is there a noise that is?
For the most part, they do. And it actually, it's an RFID system, so it actually shows on the screen what the item is.
Oh.
So even if the person chooses not to return, at least we know what item we lost.
Great, thank you.
And these numbers are for the entire department. I just wanted to show you the last decade of circulation statistics. That's items checked out. So we've increased about 12% since 2004. That dip you see reflects Monday closures and also reduced book budgets. This one's a little more complicated, but I'll steer you in the direction of that yellow highlighted line. Those are expenditures per capita on our collections, and that's for the 2 city libraries. So in 2014, we expect to spend $3.48 per capita, and that is above the state mean, but significantly below the national mean. And we pulled out the county branches. Those are the libraries operated by contract. And as I mentioned, their budgets are considerably lower, and that's their book budgets are also reflecting that. So the proposed budget by fund is it's a total of $6.37 million, primarily going to the general fund, which again is this 2 city libraries, and the county library fund, although it's 4 libraries, only consumes 31% of the entire budget. Here we see the revenues, which are actually scheduled to go down slightly. And again, that reflects the fact that we have gotten some grants, but we will continue to write grants, so hopefully we'll be able to increase those numbers in the coming years. We are also using gift money such as bequests that had been given in the past for some of our projects. Appropriations, again, pretty much a status quo budget. We are trying to grow our book budget. That still is the business that we're in, whether it's a downloadable book or a physical book or a book you listen to. And we don't have any significant projects that we budgeted for next year. And now I'll turn it over to Scott Love to present the general fund.
Thank you, Ms. Macias. Madam Mayor and council members, I will take you through our general fund now. The general fund consists of 3 programs for the Central and East Side libraries. It's administration, public services, and support services. I like to really call it the public services, which is the core of what the community sees as the library, including patron services, which handles all the circulation and the shipment between all our branches and all the Black Gold libraries. Reference services, which I included technology training in here. They've developed some wonderful technology trainings this last year that have been very popular with the public. Plus, they offer a one-on-one computer coaching, which is run by volunteers that we offer almost every day of the week. Children's and teen services, this has been a very important part of what we've been trying to do the last few years. The core mission with children and teens is assisting the children and caregivers with providing opportunities to all the children and teens that come in. The city libraries offer programs children's programs almost daily. They're all literacy-based or pre-literacy-based, and a lot of it's made possible through some of the grants that Ms. Macias mentioned earlier. And lastly, we have our wonderful literacy program, which is run mainly by volunteers. We just have one staff member that helps support that, and outreach services, which is also part of children's, and it's all the events or outreach opportunities with local schools and the other local community organizations.
If I could, Madam Mayor, when we talk about literacy and outreach, we're talking about adult literacy there, correct?
Yeah, that's adult literacy and then children's outreach.
Yeah, that takes a lot of courage for somebody to say, you know, I never really learned, and I'm 45 and I'd like to learn. So that's really admirable. And I love the one-on-one way that you do it with volunteers, as I remember.
Yes.
Thank you.
To move on here to the revenues, one thing you will notice in here in FY13 again that the intergovernmental money is quite a bit higher than the preceding year or the coming years, and again this is mainly due to the grants the library received during fiscal year 13, and we have already written grants for fiscal year 14, but we haven't heard back on them. That includes the $50,000 we got from the Institute of Museum and Library Services that we're trying to get 3 years of additional funding for that. Plus, we got a number of state grants this last year to help us with programming and literacy. Also on here, the library gifts is listed proposed for 14 and 15, the $120,000. That's the Peggy Maximus Trust that we get each year, and we will be using all of that towards the collection budget this next year. We have a number of proposed fee changes with the library. Most of them affect just the city library, so I'm going to talk about them here. The meeting room rate changes, look at increasing depending on whether it's a non-commercial meeting or a commercial private, or some meetings try to charge for attendance at the meeting. So we're looking at changing most of the meetings fall under that non-commercial free from $100 to $125 for a 3-hour meeting. Or $255 for 300 for the commercial meetings. The smaller Faulkner Gallery similarly will be going from $30 to $40 for the non-commercial, or $35 to $75 for the private or charged meetings. We're also asking to start a $25 per hour charge to have a monitor on the premises during any meetings during closed hours. Adding a $30 charge for serving refreshments at our branch libraries, which we don't currently do at this point. And then charging fees for meetings that exceed the contracted time. Monthly exhibit fee changes. The main Faulkner Gallery would go, we go from $450 to $500 a month, and the smaller galleries to go from $125 to $150 a month. That also affects the Goleta Library, which would be doing the same thing, going from $125 to $150. And there's an additional wall at the Goleta Library, which we're going to start allowing exhibitors to use that we'll charge $100 on. This last one's a little confusing. We charge between 10 and 20 cents per page for printouts and photocopies. We're just trying to align it all together. Just at 20 cents to make it less confusing. We actually don't anticipate really any additional revenue in that. And overall, we're looking at, in fiscal year 14, increasing the revenues from the fee changes by $3,760. Our appropriations by major object here. it's, as Ms. Macias said, everything's basically status quo. 68% of our budget is for the salaries and benefits. So for fiscal year 14 and 15, you'll see on here that we are looking at increasing our book budget from previous years. Part of this is also made possible by the support we get from the Friends of the Santa Barbara Library. They give us annually, I think this year maybe upwards of $100,000 of total support. So they give a lot towards our book budget. They pay for the annual summer reading program for the city libraries. And they also pay about $6,000 for the performance we have for the professional programs. And that's actually not shown here in the budget because they pay them directly. We have 2 capital improvement projects that we'll be working on this next year. The one is the Children's Library. We have about $1.2 million towards funding at this point. And we're hoping to go to final design sometime in FY14. And we have the Library Plaza, which you heard from Community Development now. The design is funded, so we will start final design on that in July. And there are some potential partnership opportunities with the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, who's going to be doing some major work on their facility and grounds. So the few P3s I wanted to call out to you is that we expect another banner year in circulation as it keeps going up, 812,000 at the city facilities. And again, as Ms. Macias said before, this is really only made possible through the use of the self-check kiosks, which now are able to take credit card, cash, and coin payment. And it frees up staff to so we can provide all the other services that we do provide. We will also be digitizing at least 100 photos from the Edson Smith collection. And this is a collection from dating back to the late 1800s up through the 1920s, historic photos of Santa Barbara. And by digitizing these, we'll put them in the catalog, so any patrons visiting our library catalog will be able to view these. We have raised almost $1 million this year in our capital campaign, and we are setting the goal again for another $1 million next year in donations, sorry. I will be investigating automated materials handling, and Ms. Macias came up with the right term on this because it gets confusing. It's self-check-in of materials. It will allow the patron to come in, put an item into a bin. It will actually provide a receipt to the patron showing what they've returned, which sometimes is something that we get requested from patrons. They're concerned when they don't know if we check something in. And then it will sort the material into bins, which will make us much more efficient and get our books back out on the shelves much quicker. And then lastly, we anticipate, as I said before, completing the final design for the Children's Library project.
Ms. Murillo, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Love and Ms. Macias, for your presentation. So the circulation number there, 812,000, that's the east side and the downtown library together? What's
Correct.
the breakdown?
I believe when I saw it last, I think it was around 90,000 for the East Side Library, and then the rest would be the central.
Okay. And then I added up all the circulations from all the libraries, and it was the 1.7 million, right, that number. Okay, because I was a little confused about that. And then I wanted to ask you about your book budget. Is that coming up next?
I didn't have anything more on the book budget at this point.
When I was at the State of the Library presentation, just someone articulated very well what happens when you backslide a little bit on keeping up with buying new books. Can you tell us about
Well,
that?
yes, we do have a slide in the end when we're talking about the unfunded service enhancements. We do talk about that. Ms. Macias did show on the slide earlier that when our book budget did decrease for a number of years, the circulation went down with it. That was also at the time when Mondays, we closed for the Mondays. So yes, it's the number of materials we get patrons on long waiting lists that can become frustrated waiting for a book to get it, and sometimes we'll just give up. So the collection budget definitely affects circulation.
Councilmember Murillo, I think what you were referring to was the fact that when you have 2 or 3 or 4 years of low book budgets, you miss out on a lot of items and your collections become dated, and then it's very, very hard to catch up.
Right, and we experienced that with paving the roads. Like, once you let it slide, it's hard to bring it back. So that really struck me that night at the State of the Library presentation. So, but, okay, I guess okay, we haven't got to your wish list, right?
Right.
Okay, so I'll just hold tight, thank you.
On the capital campaigns, I know in previous budget hearings, we had talked about if the city was contributing towards the 3.5 million, and I don't see that anywhere in the budget. So is that part of the future discussion with the bond money? I was talking in the realm of $500,000, so where is that?
I think our expectation is that when we come to you after the budget with that one-time money, that will be one of the options we will put on the table and suggest that you may want to fund it.
Okay,
It's not in the proposed
so it's not
budget.
in this proposed budget, but it will be part of that discussion in September, October?
That will be a list of one of the options to provide funding for.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Mr. House?
Actually, I was just looking real quick to see where we are in your presentation, whether I really should just wait a minute. Are you almost done?
They have the county library fund, and
Oh,
we
I
do
see.
have
Let's-
some, we do have some public comment.
Let me just take it then from here real quick. A few years ago, soon after I got on council and one of these things, or somewhere in there, Ms. Macias, I remember I was asking you about the development side of the equation with the library, and it wasn't like it wasn't happening. It must have been happening somewhere, and other people contribute, they want to support, they do different things. But there has been, in my time on council, more and more of a recognition of the value and the importance of developing, that side of the equation. And I really want to say, first of all, I appreciate that, but can you describe to me the differences that you have been making in that area? Because it seems like there has been an emphasis, and I'd like to understand better what you've been actually doing to get the kind of results that we're seeing now.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, yes, we do have a slide further on, which we can share right now,
Okay.
in terms of sharing what we've done. So
Okay, well, I can wait for that. That's all right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
fine. I didn't mean to jump the process, but it was really important to me because I want to give you a chance to say that, but also for us to appreciate that and maybe give you some encouragement.
Okay, why don't we finish up with the presentation, go to public comment, and then we'll finalize the questions or comments here.
Madam Mayor and members of the council, I'm Margaret Esther, Library Services Manager. Thank you. This is a county library fund, provides support for the libraries in Carpinteria, Montecito, Goleta, and Solvang. These libraries are managed and operated under a contract with the County of Santa Barbara. The county directive for fiscal year 14 is to maintain status quo. Open hours and staffing level remain at the fiscal year 13 levels. The communities of Solvang, Carpinteria, and Montecito have libraries in county buildings. In addition, the local communities are providing high levels of ongoing financial support for these libraries. To maintain status quo, the use of reserves and gift funds are required to balance the budgets on all 4 libraries in the county library fund. The Goleta Valley Library building is owned by the city of Goleta. We recently learned yesterday, they were still in their workshop, that the city of Goleta is considering providing general fund money to support full-day operations on Mondays. The emphasis at this library continues to be service to families. The new key objective of P3 for this library is to update the science and technology section of the nonfiction books for children. These new books and updated collections will support local students as they strive to meet the standards for the California curriculum with the emphasis on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. While county libraries receive donations and gifts annually for financial support to their operations, the anticipated funding level for the next 2 years is slightly above $1.8 million. Maintaining status quo as directed by the county for these 4 libraries will require expenditures of $2 million. With the county directive, the reserve funds and gifts will be used to maintain current levels of operation. Because there is very low funding for these 4 libraries, the staffing levels are minimal. These libraries have few full-time staff, and to maintain open hours, there's a minimum number of hourly staff at each location. And that's I'll turn it back over to Ms. Macias.
Thank you, Margaret. So now we get to the fun stuff, our accomplishments over the last year. And the first item there is the grant that we're most proud of because it's very prestigious. It's a national leadership grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. We received it for developing a reading together program where kids read to each other, and we are partnering with the Museum of Art on that. In addition, we have received other grants. We received a $12,000 grant from the state for a program called Fabulous Fridays, which encourages early literacy through song and dance for children that are 0 to 3 and their caregivers. The state library also restored funding for our adult literacy program. We received about $18,000. It doesn't nearly cover the cost, but it helps. The Junior League also provided $30,000 in funding for, and this will support some of the services that we had to give up. And in looking at the grants we've received, we're actually trying to bring back some of the services we lost, making new partnerships with other organizations that will leverage our resources and help us in providing more services, and taking opportunities for technology kinds of programs. So we're not just bringing back, but we're expanding with these grants that we get. We did get $50,000 from the Orfalea Foundation for the Children's Library Project, another $50,000 from the Santa Barbara Foundation for that project. We also received $10,000 from the Kirby Jones Foundation from for our adult literacy program. And last week, received notification of success in 2 different grant applications. One was $10,000 from the state library to support our materials collections. And the other, I'm not allowed to reveal yet, but it is a federal grant that will be announced later this month, so we'll send out a press release. And we have about a half dozen grants pending, so we feel that we've been pretty successful in development. And then the next bullet line there is $950,000 that we've raised in gifts, grants, and pledges that are specifically for the children's library programs, and that's this year. To date, we have $1.2 million towards the project. So we are making progress. And did you have further questions, Councilmember House?
Well, I want to, first of all, to thank you and appreciate, your staff for doing that, but what specifically have you done that has gotten these kinds of results? I guess that's really the question I had.
So you remember approving a contract with a professional fundraiser, a campaign consultant. She's actually a campaign consultant. So we have created a campaign. We're in the quiet phase. We are soliciting leadership gifts. We've gotten some pledges. One of the pledges actually sent in their first payment. We are in the process of cultivating various members of the community. So we are on our way. We've identified community members at different levels of gifts, and then we're putting together a core of volunteers that will help us in the public phase of the campaign.
Is that the royal we? Is that you? Is that a?
It's
is
very
that
few
a
we's.
position? I mean, who's the weave?
So the campaign consultant that we meet with regularly, and then another, she was actually a staff person. Her name is Janice Pegram. She is now no longer a city employee. She is now employed or working for the foundation as a consultant running the campaign.
Okay, so this is the last piece.
And I'm sorry, I
Go ahead,
don't want to
please.
forget Bev Schwartzberg, who is
Sure,
also
adult
part of the
literacy.
group. Yes.
And that, so this is where I was going with the questions. We primed the pump. We got it going. We have had active participation by your staff and yourself. And so when I look forward to the next 2 years, what do we need to do to keep it going as opposed to maybe let the person leave and then not replace that position or whatever it is? So that's what do we do to keep it going? It's good what we're doing. We got the pipe sort of full, right? And it's moving.
Yes.
So.
Well, we've actually created the Santa Barbara Public Library Foundation, and we are attracting board members that I think are very enthusiastic and supportive and will carry on the mission beyond the building of the children's library.
Okay.
So that's our goal.
And you're providing staff support, I guess, to
Yes.
support them and assist them in doing it. Thank you very much.
The last two items here are that having lost a good number of staff in our technical services department, we actually are now having our vendor provide our books pre-cataloged. So they arrived ready to go on the shelf. And our circulation has increased 17.2% at city libraries in the first 9 months. That's a tremendous amount. Okay, on to our wish list. So these are a couple things that we would be interested in should monies be available. The first is a full-time librarian too, and the dollar amount doesn't reflect the entire cost, and that's because we currently have a half-time librarian working in reference, and we want to increase that to a full-time person that can spend the rest of their time in youth services. That is where we have a lot of activity, a lot of programs. Sometimes it's hard to keep up with all the new things that we're trying to add. And we also want to be able to take advantage of expanded technology and digital opportunities. I do have listed there one of our newest and I think most exciting projects. I recently gave a talk on the future of libraries, and Jim was there, and I said that libraries are no longer a place for storing books, but a place for a community gathering space where people come together to share ideas and come up with new ideas. And then about 2 weeks later, I was contacted by someone from Santa Barbara Makerspace, which they describe on their website as a fun place to make interesting things with smart people. Our activities range from robotics and electronics to web development, mobile apps, and computer security. So we are partnering with them to do a community forum in May this month, and they have several panelists that are going to talk about what they make, from a seventh grade student to a high schooler who just got a high school graduate who just got a full-time job programming after learning programming at the Makerspace. So as you can tell, we're very excited about it, but we're also going to be offering classes on programming for kids, programming for teens. So we have a very enthusiastic group of people. I've also connected with people that are interested in hubs, which is very similar to, but it's more the entrepreneurial side of getting together with new ideas. So we're very excited about expanding into the community, but really need someone to corral all this energy. And then we can always use, our book budget is almost a bottomless pit, especially when we have the increased of demand for the downloadable audios. That is, if you ever download anything and try to find something to check out, you'll agree that we need a bigger collection there. And finally, last week, our board, we had a State of the Library Board meeting, and the board unanimously recommended that City Council approve the library budget as proposed and approve the unfunded service enhancements, prioritizing staffing request over the request for additional collections budget funds. And that concludes our presentation.
Thank you. Why don't we go to public comment, unless, is that all right? Okay, we'll start with Bessie Condos, be followed by Susan Shields, and then Deborah Pontifex. Good afternoon.
Madam Mayor and members of the City Council, I'm Bessie Condos, a native of Santa Barbara, a public library user and advocate, having recently returned to my hometown after being the Children and Youth Services Consultant at the California State Library, where I worked with public libraries throughout the state, planning services for families and for children. Public libraries have a long tradition of being the cornerstone of sustainable communities and are one of the few community agencies that provide services to a wide range of constituents, including seniors, the visually impaired, those in need of literacy service, parents and families, children and youth, which the Santa Barbara Public Library does exceptionally well. In California, where school libraries services are limited and in many cases non-existent, the public library serves a dual role as both the school and the public library. Excuse me. An investment in public library services provides an excellent long-range return for everyone, especially children and youth. Santa Barbara is well known for its cultural activities, institutions of higher learning, and providing excellent public library services. Public libraries are an important 21st century resource that voters like and respect. In addition, public libraries use tax dollars wisely, provide a greater access to technology, are a safe place, and are a community hub for community information. The public library played a vital role in my life. English is my second language, and my parents were Greek immigrants who placed a tremendous emphasis on education and lifelong learning, the mission of the public library. Today, I ask you to please support library services and to ensure that Santa Barbara Public Library is able to continue the tradition of providing library services to everyone in the community. Also, I'd like to acknowledge your support for the extended hours on Monday for both the Central Library and the East Side Library. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan Shields.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and Council members. My name is Susan Shields. I am both a friend of the library and a library volunteer in the literacy program and the outreach. And I'd like to say first off that I have always believed that public libraries should be free. That is my basic belief. I'd like to compliment the library administration on doing the absolute best they can with the limited funding that they have. I think they are remarkable in achieving that. I think you probably took note of the fact that the total materials per capita is lower in our libraries than the national average, and also that the collection expenditures are below the national average. My particular interest, and I am the person that Ms. Murillo referred to, who came to the open board meeting with a comment about the book collection, books in particular. And I feel there are two aspects to this problem. I am a great reader, and I frequently look for books in the library catalog. Over and over again, the book that I want is not in the downtown library. It's in Arroyo Grande, it's in Santa Maria, it might be in Goleta, but it could be far away. Therefore, a person has to reserve the book, They have to wait. They don't know how long it's going to take. They have to pay $1 to get the book. So this is what is involved in trying to get books that are not being kept in the downtown library. The downtown library sounds as if it ought to be our main collection, but it's not. I sometimes wonder if there are more books at Chaucer's than there are in the downtown library, because there are so many at Chaucer's. So you have pointed out also that the circulation was down, and I am one of the reasons that the circulation went down, because I'm sorry to admit that because I didn't want to jump through all the hoops to finally get the book I wanted, I have actually been buying the books online or going to Abe Books and buying them used. I'm not very proud of that, but because I wanted to get the books. Secondly, I feel that we must take into account our population with a lower income. The library is a terribly important resource for people who do not have the money to buy a Kindle or a Nook or go to the bookstore and buy books. This may be their only avenue to finding actual books that they can hold in their hand and take home and read right there. So I'm speaking really not only on behalf of myself and my frustration, but also for those people in the community who do not have the economic resources to pay for the books that they want to read. Therefore, I request that you approve additional funding for the unfunded library enhancements, and I would suggest, although the board approved the budget and they prioritized the money for a library position, which I cannot argue with, I would like you also to give serious consideration to supporting more funds for the book collection. Thank you.
Deborah Pontifex will be the final speaker.
Good afternoon. I'm Deborah Pontifex. I'm on the board of Friends of the Santa Barbara Library. And I, too, would like to thank the City Council for finding the money last year to get the downtown and the East Side libraries open on Monday. That was a really big deal for the community and has been just a huge benefit. As you know, the Friends of the Library supports a number of programs for the library, including collections, the summer reading program, the Reading is Fundamental program, and performances for children in the library. The summer reading program in particular is critical because it helps stem reading loss during the summer for the children that are involved. I have used libraries my whole life. I am also involved in 2 other volunteer programs for which the library is very important. I am a tutor in the library's adult literacy program. I tutor a Hispanic woman who's 32 years old, Maria. We just celebrated our 3rd year anniversary together, and we usually meet in the library. It's been a great program for me and for her. And I also mentor a 14-year-old Hispanic girl through the Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse's Fighting Back mentoring program, and I've been with her for 4 years. She's now 14, senior at a freshman at San Marcos, and going to the library is one of her favorite things to do. So the library is very important for those 2 programs, and I hope that you can support the library's budget request in full. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you all for your service, too, on the Friends of the Library. Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, it's gratifying to see that the extra hours on Monday produce such good results. It's a nice bang for your buck result. I was going to ask Ms. Macias, do we have or do we still have security issues of any kind at the main branch, and do we have expenditures for that? And if so, what is that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, we do have building monitors, and we last year increased funding to make one of those positions a permanent part-time position. So we have someone on the premises every hour we're open, but we still have some issues, and I believe some of them are tied to issues surrounding, for instance, we have belongings that get left around on the premises, but I think there are certain restrictions on removing them. And we can't be outside all the time. We're in with our monitor is inside most of the time, but does make rounds on the outside. So it is problematic. There are people who don't follow the rules, and we spend a lot of time trying to enforce the rules, and we do spend a lot of time calling the PD. We work very well with them. Is there anything else you want to say about that, Scott?
I think that covers most of it. One thing we were able to do with this benefit at Monitor was create new rules of conduct, and we now have forms. We showed them to PD. They were quite excited in seeing them that kind of help us outline with a patron when they're doing stuff that they can't do, and we try to get them in line, but often can't. And so I thank the council last year for adding that position and having this staff member there most of the time. He helps coordinate with the hourly monitors.
Well, it's our hope that hopefully the new plaza design might relieve some of that issue, but is that then a security person a library position, or is it a contracted out position, or is it a library employee?
It's a library employee.
All right. Thank you.
And I noticed there's new coat of paint around the plaza. Thank you,
Yes, thank
because
you.
it was sorely needed. So it does look a little better. But I agree, the plaza itself needs the big facelift, but for at least for now, that's an improvement. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much. So that covers this budget hearing. Our next one, when is the next one? May 6th. We'll see you then.